Good evening, everyone. This is the Northern Dissident, February 6, 2022. Just wanted to share with you my thoughts on the Freedom Convoy to date, what it's accomplished, and what's next. The first accomplishment that needs to be highlighted is the fact that a few days into the protest, a few days after the truckers had settled in to Ottawa, the Premier of Saskatchewan announced that by the end of February, all COVID restrictions were going to be lifted, in particular the vaccine passports. And a couple days later, the Premier of Alberta announced that vaccine passports were coming to an end there. And not to be outdone by Saskatchewan, he announced that this might happen even sooner. So maybe sometime in the middle of February. We'll believe this when we see it, but that is a very good step in the right direction. And I believe that you cannot have a long-term situation in Canada where some provinces have vaccine passports and other ones do not. Because freedom is a magnet, people gravitate towards freedom. So for those of you listening outside of Canada, every single province right now has a vaccine passport system. And by the way, they implemented them almost in unison within a period of like less than a month and a half. I think Quebec was the first one, and every other province just got on board, even though you had premiers like Kenney and Ford, who had initially said, when Quebec announced plans, they said, there's no way in hell we're going to have a vaccine passport. And they got their asses in line. But we now seem to be at the point where the tide is turning. And if Saskatchewan and Alberta actually go through with what they're saying, it's going to be a matter of time before other provinces start lifting their vaccine passports. I'm thinking the next province will probably be Manitoba, because that's also a prairie province with a conservative premier. And when other provinces start lifting these mandates, the pressure that the other provincial governments are going to feel can only grow, because the people will see that they have the initiative, and it's time for them to start getting more vocal about their demands. I found it particularly interesting this week that the chief medical officer in Ontario seemed to hint that vaccine passports there were on their way out. And I'm thinking from Doug Ford's perspective, he's got an election coming up in a few months. He is going to hemorrhage a lot of votes from his base if he doesn't soon start walking back the mandates, particularly the vaccine passport and hopefully eventually the mask mandates. I know that once Ontario announces the end of their vaccine passports, there's no way other provinces, any holdouts, particularly Quebec, they've been really the sickest with this. They've actually banned people from going to church who aren't vaccinated. So there's no way that I can imagine Quebec holding out for much longer once Ontario scraps their vaccine passport. The reason why is just the economics of it. You have two provinces that share a huge border with each other. There's a lot of people in Quebec, let's say about 1 million Quebecers who live less than a 30-minute drive from the Ontario border. I mean, heck, Montreal itself is like a 40-minute drive from the border in Ontario. So if you have a situation where in Quebec you need a vax passport just to go to Costco, you can imagine that once Ontario drops their vaccine passport requirements, you're going to see a lot of people from Quebec just shopping in Ontario, and that's just going to create a demand on the part of businesses to get Francois Legault to drop the passport. So all this to say, that initial decision by Premier Scott Moe to drop the vaccine passports really created a ripple effect. And when you hear him speak, you can see that I don't think he was ever really in favor of these passports. I think he was kind of bullied by his handlers and the public health people in that province. But good for him for standing up. Looks like vaccine passports could be on their way out. The Convoy is responsible for ejecting Aaron O'Toole from the leadership of the Conservative Party. From the very beginning of his tenure as leader of the Conservative Party, Aaron O'Toole has been playing his base for a bunch of fools. He campaigned during the leadership campaign as a true blue Tory. He literally signed a pledge saying he would not impose a carbon tax. He promised to reverse Justin Trudeau's gun grabs. And he said he would welcome and give the social conservatives in the party a seat at the table. And the very moment he became leader, he immediately did a 180, started to distance himself from social conservatives in the lead up to the federal election in the fall of 2021. He flip-flopped on the carbon tax, flip-flopped on Trudeau's gun grab. This is your typical slimy politician. You know, there's actually a picture of Aaron O'Toole smiling next to the pledge that he signed, saying no carbon tax. How somebody like that can talk with a straight face and try to lead a country is really just beyond me. So seeing him get the boot was definitely a very welcome development. We do need to be realistic, however. Whoever replaces O'Toole as leader is probably not going to be as populist as we want. I would consider it a win, however, if whoever replaces him takes a stand against vaccine mandates, both especially in the public sector, because that's, for the federal government, that's what they have jurisdiction over, but also who publicly says that they're opposed to the exclusion of people who are not vaccinated from society. Someone who publicly says that they're opposed to vaccine passports. That would be a very welcome change. Someone who campaigns and says that they are not going to impose a carbon tax, repeal the carbon tax that the Liberals have imposed on Canadians. Just that, I think, in and of itself would be a step in the right direction. The final point I want to highlight is a little more subtle, but I think it will have very, very big implications for the future of populism in Canada. And that is the fact that as a people, we really earned our stripes on the world stage, particularly in the eyes of the Americans. For those of you that follow people like Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, you know, the who's who of populism in the U.S., if you follow their social media, you'll see this Convoy is something that they've really invested a lot of time in promoting, in following. And it appears as though the working class in the United States has also been following this. You got to give credit to Tucker Carlson. This past week, he's been covering it on an almost a nightly basis on his show. When GoFundMe announced plans to basically confiscate $9 million that people had raised for the truckers, there was a huge outcry that came primarily from American commentators. The very next day, Saturday morning, you had governors, people like Ron DeSantis, saying they were going to investigate GoFundMe for fraud. Now it's Sunday, and Give, Send, Go, a Christian fundraising site, has agreed to host their fundraiser, and they've already raised, as of Sunday evening, $3 million. And I can tell you, as a Canadian, I've tried to give money. I'm trying to sort this out with their customer service, but it appears that only Americans can give money. Someone can drop a line in the comments and let me know how Canadians can donate. That would be great. But the point is, Americans have donated over $3 million American dollars to the Canadian truckers in less than 48 hours. This is big. This is very big, because what it suggests is that as we move forward, it's important to keep our American friends in the loop with what we do. They, for all their flaws, the conservative movement in the United States has a critical mass of supporters, has a critical mass of content creators, has a critical mass of donors. And that's something that we shouldn't overlook. They have really, really helped amplify what's going on in Ottawa. So in the week ahead, it's really anybody's guess what's going to happen next. On the one hand, we see that similar protests, similar convoys have popped up in other parts of the country, Quebec City and Toronto. Those are, I'd say, the two big ones. In both cases there, the police appear to have been a little more prepared, in the sense that they're trying to ensure that the truckers cannot set up camp for the long haul as they have in Ottawa. There's also that blockade in Alberta, blocking a main highway on the U.S. border. That is still going strong. I think it looks like the Ottawa police are planning some sort of forceful eviction of the truckers. We'll have to wait and see. I think there the question's going to be whether or not there are enough willing police officers who are willing to do the regime's dirty work. From what I've seen, a lot of the police officers are either ambiguous or they're outright supporting the truckers. So it's going to be interesting to see if logistically the police can pull this off. Obviously, there's safety in numbers, so it's important for folks to go down there and show their support if they can. That apparently we've seen some tweets this afternoon from the Ottawa police saying that if you give any fuel or food to the truckers, you might be subject to arrest. So please, everyone listening, be careful. But all else equal, I think the more people there, the harder it's going to be to break it up. So it's really anyone's call now. If you had told me last week that they would still be in Ottawa, that the protests would have spread to other parts of the country, that Erin O'Toole would have been shown the door, and that provinces would start dropping these health restrictions, I wouldn't have believed you. Still a lot of work to do, still a lot of freedoms that need to be won again. But I think we can say, when we look back at this a few years from now, that it was the truckers' convoy, the Freedom Convoy, that marked the end of the increase in restrictions. Keep in mind that at the start of this year, Jean-Yves Duclos, the federal healthcare minister, was musing out loud, saying that provinces had the authority to institute mandatory vaccinations. We're talking Austria style here. That's not going to happen anymore, people. They're not going to be musing about that anymore. And you can thank the truckers for that. The start of January, you got the feeling it was getting really, really dark. Politicians were really thinking, how can we make life as hard as possible for these folks? Quebec announced that they were going to start taxing the unvaccinated. And by the way, they announced they're going to scrap that. So the tide is turning. I'm cautiously optimistic. Got a lot of work to do. Give these people your support if you can't go out in person. God bless and have a blessed week, people.